For a millennia, the colossal entity, known to the Amaru people simply as Father, had observed the bloody turning wheels of Earthrealm. Rakkanix was a creature of myth-made flesh, a giant male dragon whose wings cast shadows over entire valleys and whose breath carried the ancient hum of the world's primordial dawn. Yet for the very first time in his staggeringly long, majestic existence, this mighty sovereign of scales tasted the bitter ash of sheer dismissal. He was rejected, and this unprecedented defiance did not come from a rival deity or a cosmic force, but from a drastically inferior being. That lesser creature was none other than King Nirzal, the notoriously ruthless sovereign who held the kingdom of Drea in his iron-fisted grip. To understand the magnitude of this diplomatic anomaly, one must comprehend the nature of Rakkanix himself. Unlike the savage, blood-crazed reputation that stained many of the primitive tribes sharing his ancestral lineage, this colossal behemoth possessed a profoundly gentle spirit. He was an anomaly among predators, a philosopher trapped in the body of a leviathan. Rakkanix possessed an insatiable hunger for the acquisition of knowledge. He dedicated his centuries to learning, teaching, and observing the fragile societies of Earthrealm. He championed diplomacy over devastation. He actively sought to establish dialogues, forge alliances, and weave a tapestry of peace across a realm perpetually drowning in its own spilled blood. For decades, the kingdom of Drea had commanded the dragon's undivided attention. The fact that the Drea were recognized as a wise civilization never escaped his piercing emerald gaze. While other races busied themselves with petty squabbles over dirt and copper, the Drea delved deep into the fabric of reality. Rakkanix was fiercely curious about their complex philosophical paradigms, their perilous arcane experiments, and their deeply structured ritualistic practices. He watched from the peaks as they bent magic and logic to their will. The dragon nurtured a grand vision. He believed that if the Drea could only broaden their parochial perspective and look at Earthrealm through a holistic lens, they could serve as the ultimate paragon. They had the intellectual capacity to become the guiding light for all other wandering societies. Driven by this optimism, Rakkanix formulated an ambitious strategy. His primary objective was to orchestrate a benevolent, non-violent intervention into the dark politics of the kingdom, aiming to anchor Amaru-Drea relations upon an unbreakable foundation of commercial trade and cultural synthesis. However, Rakkanix's noble intentions were destined to collide with a wall of pure xenophobia. King Nirzal, the late father of Drea's final monarch, Luria, was a dictator paralyzed by his own tyrannical paranoia. During his reign, he enforced a suffocatingly strict isolationist doctrine. Nirzal trusted absolutely no one, neither his advisors nor his neighbors, and certainly not an ancient winged behemoth preaching harmony. He was a man who firmly believed that every geopolitical puzzle could and should be dismantled through calculated cruelty and overwhelming martial force. Naturally, the dragon's naive enthusiasm for open dialogue failed entirely to impress the slaughter-hungry king. Aware of the monarch's vicious reputation, Rakkanix realized that presenting a purely altruistic treaty would be suicidal to his cause. He had to adapt. The Emerald Leviathan's ultimate objective remained unchanged: cultural integration and the fortification of mutual friendships. But his methodology shifted. He carefully tailored his proposition, weaving in tactical advantages and militaristic bait designed specifically to seduce a warlord's mind. When the great dragon finally conversed with the king of Drea, it spoke not of peace, but of power. The Amaru people bleed for their territories, their families, their sacred traditions, and their absolute freedom. Rakkanix proclaimed, his deep voice vibrating through the very marrow of the kingdom's guards. They are a multitude, an unstoppable tide of muscle and will. It is entirely true that the tribes are inherently warlike, and they execute the art of slaughter with terrifying efficiency. Let us trade in the currencies you respect: weapons, strategic warfare, and vital resources. Allow us to bestow upon your legions the advanced healing methodologies we have perfected over centuries. Let us weave the deeply spiritual, untamed aspects of Amaru shamanism with the cold, ancient arcane rituals of Drea. Let the harsh lessons we have carved from survival empower your people, and in return, allow the intellectual majesty of Drea's civilization to refine the Amaru's primal traditions. Above all, let us establish a formidable, unassailable cultural dialogue. It was a masterfully crafted pitch, speaking directly to military logistics, arcane enhancement, and tactical supremacy. Yet, to the paranoid mind of King Nirzal, these seemingly generous words echoed like a death knell. The concept of Drea civilization was utterly binary. It consisted solely of the pure-blood citizens who ruled and the subjugated slaves who served. There was no middle ground. To the tyrannical king, this good-natured call for unity was nothing more than an insidious vector for malignant assimilation. Nirzal's response was immediate, devoid of warmth, and dripping with supremacy. The kingdom of Drea belongs exclusively to the Drea, and so it shall remain until the end of days, the monarch hissed. The highly advanced culture of this kingdom cannot and will not be diluted to accommodate the primitive lifestyles, barbaric beliefs, and feral expectations of the Amaru. Our societies are fundamentally, violently incompatible. To refuse friendship with the Amaru does not inherently dictate that we are declaring war. However, make no mistake, Dragon. Drea possesses both the catastrophic military might and the unflinching resolve to classify any obstacle in its path as an enemy and subsequently eradicate it. Despite Rakkanix's calculated effort to speak the king's language, to appeal strictly to Nirzal's lust for tactical advantage, the dragon fundamentally failed to cultivate an atmosphere of alliance. The rejection was absolute. The fallout of this diplomatic collapse was swift and severe. Upon hearing that the Drea king had dared to dismiss the benevolent offerings of their revered father, the untamed factions of the Amaru erupted into a frenzy of insulted pride. Dozens of savage, war-painted tribes clamored for immediate retribution, screaming for the authorization to wage a relentless, bloody crusade against the stone walls of the kingdom. Rakkanix, maintaining his pacifist philosophy, explicitly refused to issue such a command. He displayed no outward aggression toward the arrogant monarch. But his people were not so forgiving. Acting on their own volatile fury, the Amaru tribes mobilized a massive, intimidating vanguard, marching upon the borderlands, pressing against Satt, the outermost Drea frontier city. Countless seasoned warriors intentionally relocated their camps to this volatile boundary line, transforming the landscape into a bristling forest of spears and totems. It was a calculated display of raw, physical menace, a deliberate, psychological siege. A suffocating atmosphere of passive-aggressive tension choked the borderlands. While the ancient Emerald Dragon may not have viewed Drea as an active enemy, his fanatic children heavily disagreed. They became a seething, organized horde, an ocean of primal fury waiting for a single nod from their father to wash over the Drea defenders. As for King Nirzal, he lost not a single moment of sleep over the brewing storm at his gates. He never second-guessed his brutal dismissal. In his calculating mind, the decision was flawless, and his venomous words were entirely justified. In fact, this was a ruler who had actively accelerated and industrialized the practice of slavery during his bloody tenure. Deep within the dark recesses of his strategic planning, Nizal's vision perfectly mirrored the most extreme, xenophobic factions of the Drea bureaucracy. He firmly believed that if the Amaru tribes dared to cross the border of Satt, they would not merely be slaughtered, they would be systematically broken, chained, and absorbed into the kingdom's ever-expanding labor camps as beasts of burden. Nizal took his xenophobia, his cruelty, and his unwavering isolationism to his grave, leaving behind a kingdom isolated by its own arrogance, entirely surrounded by enemies of its own making. Yet the true tragedy of the kingdom of Drea was merely beginning. Following Nizal's eventual demise, the blood-soaked crown passed to his daughter, Luria. The new sovereign observed Earthrealm through a fundamentally different, far more terrifying prism than her father. While Nizal relied on brute force and high walls to keep the world out, Luria recognized that isolation was a waste of potential leverage. To the final monarch of Drea, there was no such thing as an unusable force. Whether it was the ancient arcane arts, the backs of broken slaves, or the primal fury of a dragon's children, matriarch Luria was a woman utterly prepared to evaluate, manipulate, and ruthlessly exploit every single breathing entity that crossed her path.